dir.baddosgames. Over 4,000 entries. There are thousands of DOS games. Most of them are terrible. Here are 25 more in my travels that I've found that aren't. I've been doing a little research, and it turns out that about 1 in every 10 games I play manages to simultaneously break the 20-minute time limit and entertain me in the process. So really this should be a top 10 video, right? Well, no, because there's a lot of really enjoyable titles that don't break the time limit. So here's your list. 25. Obliterator. A smooth space shooter with enemies galore to blast in the finest arcade tradition. There isn't much to Obliterator, but it has a rollicking soundtrack and solid gameplay for when you just want to drop in, blast a few baddies, and then go about your day. 24. Omnicron Conspiracy. The more I thought of my time with Omnicron Conspiracy, the more I realised I enjoyed myself. This late 80s adventure title has you patrolling space as a policeman and trying to get to the bottom of crimes in space. 23. Orion Burger. An underrated and functional point-and-click adventure title with an incredible voice cast and some solid comedic chops. If you're a fan of the sillier side of the genre and haven't given this one a crack, then now's the time to dust it off and save the world from invasion.
I'm Ned Jerry. From Papyrus, this is Nascar Racing.
Isn't that their sport the one for the rednecks that just means driving around in circles? That's what I thought. But it turns out that there's a lot of strategy involved in NASCAR, and this racing sim handles it all superbly for its time. Fans of 90s racers are missing out if they're put off by the name. 21. Space Quest 1. Roger Wilco in the Saurian encounter. Take the fantasy trappings of King's Quest and replace it with comedic sci-fi, and you've placed yourself in the boots of Roger Wilco, a janitor who somehow becomes involved in saving the day after a deadly alien invasion. This VGA remake has all the hallmarks of a quality Sierra adventure. 20. Alien Trilogy. Well, it could have been so much more. This Doom clone with the Alien franchise license has more than enough about it to warrant a spot on this list. The game oozes atmosphere and genuinely makes you panic when a xenomorph spots you, and the oppressive feeling carries the game despite its faults. 19. Eye of the Beholder. A first-person party-based dungeon-crawling blobber that paved the way for Lands of Lore. It lacks auto-mapping and is decidedly old-school in its mentality and mechanics, but it also sports a Dungeons & Dragons license too. It might be creaking with age, but it's a classic worth revisiting. 18. Blake Stone, Aliens of Gold. Suave Agent Blake Stone repels an alien invasion with British fortitude and style. Much more than a sci-fi reskin of Wolf 3D, Blake has auto-mapping, inventory, and non-hostile NPCs. It's a shame he wasn't released a few months earlier. 17. The Settlers. A real-time city builder with strategy elements. The Settlers is high on charm and focuses on slow-paced economic management, more commonly seen in turn-based strategies. Tackle the supply and demand of your fledgling colony and spread out over the map at a peaceful rate, before turning nasty and conquering your foes. 16. Eamonn. The biggest shock on this entire list. The deluxe version of Eamonn initially plays like a poor Ultima clone, until you discover that this is merely the overworld for an enormous series of text adventures collated over 17 years. One of the oldest games I've ever played, Eamonn comes from the early days of the text adventure, but unlike its contemporaries, it was completely free, and still is. Give it a go. 15. Sim Earth. Taking the ideas of SimCity and applying them to an entire planet. Sim Earth is an ambitious ecosystem simulator where you get to play God and either nurture or destroy the life that forms on the world at your fingertips. I'll admit I don't understand the finer points of the game, but that didn't stop me from marveling at the complexity and the genius of Will Wright's construction. 14. Terminator. Future Shock. A dystopian world with WASD movement, mouse look, grenade hotkey, irradiated areas, vehicles and buildings you could enter, fully 3D enemies, and the Terminator license. In 1995. Just a terrible shame that it was running on the janky X engine. Otherwise, the little-known Bethesda Softworks would have been $1 billion Oh. 13. Boppin'. Boppin' is another in that tiny niche of puzzle games I actually enjoy. Your task is to match the appropriately colourful items together in order to release video game monsters that had sadly been imprisoned. If you fail to do this, your triangular character blows his brains out. Well, that took a turn. 12. The Dig. A 90s point-and-click sci-fi adventure from LucasArts based on an idea from Steven Spielberg and written in part by Orson Scott Card. The Dig had all the big names and expectations were sky high for it. It didn't become a mega hit, but it's certainly another excellent adventure game from a company famous for them. 11. Bubble Bobble. One of the closest things to a digital drug in the gaming world. Bubble Bobble's simple yet addictive gameplay loop and high skill ceiling kept you coming back for more. You've been turned into a dinosaur that can blow bubbles. Trap fast-moving enemies in these bubbles and then burst them, but don't let the monsters touch you. 10. Descent. You know a game is good when you can only play it 20 minutes at a time before wanting to throw up in a bucket, and still want to play it despite that. Descent was fully 3D, had 6 degrees of freedom to operate in, mind-bending verticality in its tight corridors, and dangerous robotic adversaries. Oh, and you had to escape the level before it exploded. No pressure. 9. The Settlers 2. Veni, Vidi, Vici. Having 2 games from the same series randomly crop up within 100 entries and both earn a spot on this list is awkward, as the sequel to The Settlers is essentially the same game as the first, but refined and improved in every way possible. Blue Byte took all the elements of the original game and improved them, which is exactly what you want from a follow-up. 8. Star Trek 25th Anniversary. Okay, so I didn't enjoy the ship combat at all, but having the original actors from Star Trek voice a point-and-click adventure game in 1992 while they were all still alive? Do you know how many games feature DeForest Kelley as McCoy? 2. This one and its immediate sequel. Well done interplay. It's one of the best Star Trek games ever. 7. Sam & Max Hit the Road. Every point-and-click adventure game LucasArts made in the 90s was pure gold, and the biggest recommendation I can give for the madcap adventures of a detective dog and his psychotic bunny pal is that yes, it's one of those. Do you like the wackier side of 90s LucasArts adventure games? Then you must have already played this, right? Right? 6. Sensible World of Soccer. For those of you who hate football, Sensi is a turn-based management game with real-time arcadey action elements loosely based around the game of football. You control a team, their transfer policy, squad composition, and tactics before launching them onto the field in a fiendishly addictive brawl with a huge skill ceiling. It's a football game in the same way that Mario Kart is a racing simulation, and that's why people are still playing it 26 years later. 5. Degeneration. This game floored me when I first played it. Smooth controls, interactive puzzle environments and computers, a conversation system, and a skyscraper under siege from genetically engineered bioweapons. is. There's also some quality writing in there, and a colourful cyberpunk flavour to its near future. You're a courier, and you have to make an emergency delivery down 10 floors of traps and weapons without dying in the process. Good luck. 4. Lords of the Realm 2. While I only scratched the surface of the complex agricultural and warfare strategy game that is Lords of the Realm 2, its legacy has been cemented quite clearly. This was a Total War game before Total War games even existed. A turn-based economic overworld in which you look after settlements and raise armies, coupled with a real-time strategy engine representing the battlefield and your forces upon it. But for unfortunate mismanagement, Impressions Games, who were bigger than Blizzard at the time, would have gone on to be in the place that Creative Assembly are now. 3. Tomb Raider. To give you an idea of just how revolutionary the appearance of Lara Croft was, the first ever third-person platformer game came out the year before. Going from there to where Tomb Raider was is like inventing the wheel and then following it up with the Formula 1 car. It was like a playable Indiana Jones movie, but with a fresh new protagonist. And this cinematic approach to 3D gaming would continue for the next quarter of a century, and no doubt beyond that. With Lara's influence being felt in everything from open world action games and platformers through to RPGs. 2. Wolfenstein 3D. It's a DOS shooter from id Software. Of course it's in the top 5 by default. You play as BJ Blazkowicz. Go kill all the Nazis. It's the father of all first-person shooting, and still regarded as one of the greatest games ever created. No, seriously, I don't need to talk about this any more than I have. I've done over 45 minutes worth of videos on it already. 1.
Barbarian.
1. Ultima Underworld. Possibly the most important game ever created. The first truly 3D first-person game. To my knowledge, Ultima Underworld has been responsible for the creation of 3 separate genres: the first-person shooter, the immersive sim, and the third-person cinematic platformer. Almost every 3D game that has come since has either been directly or indirectly influenced by this title. Setting aside the mind-boggling level of influence though, you've got a game with physics, dynamic lighting, the ability to jump and swim in that 3D environment, and a dynamic music score to play along with you. You had factions and reputations and an auto map you could annotate as you went up and down the slopes of the dungeon in real time rather than being stuck on a grid in a singular flat plane. And all this descriptive stuff? It's completely overlooking the most important part in all of this. Ultima Underworld is a really fun game to play. And at the end of the day, that's what matters most.